We are told that in this world there are two types of gifted people. The first are espers, who are born with powerful abilities, while the second are guides, people with the power to stabilize an esper's unstable energy. Because while espers are blessed with supernatural talents, those powers come at a cost. The strain on their minds often leads to instability, which is why they need the guidance of a guide to keep their emotions under control. Without the guidance, an esper can spiral out of control at any moment. That's exactly what happened to the husband of our main protagonist. Without a guide to anchor him, he lost control and his power began leaking out uncontrollably, flooding the area around him. The sight alone made it clear there was no saving him anymore, since getting close to him was nearly impossible, and so the only option left was evacuation before any lives were lost. In that same crowd stood our hero, a B-class guide, and upon seeing her husband losing control, she froze, since he wasn't just any esper. He was an S-class, which meant not everyone had the power to get him under control, especially not her, who was just a B-class. But the thought of losing him was unbearable for her, so without hesitation, she rushed straight into the blazing storm of fire surrounding him. Reaching him was nearly impossible for her as a B-class guide, but still she couldn't let the man she loved die before her eyes. So even as the power burned through her body, she kept fighting to bring him back. And then, against all odds, a miracle happened and she felt her husband slowly starting to return to his senses. But the cost was devastating. Her body was damaged beyond saving, and she knew full well this was her end. So in her final moments, she whispered her thanks to him for always being by her side, even knowing he had never truly loved her. At that time, on the edge of death, she carried only one prayer. If there was a next life, she wished to be born into a warm, loving family, meet a man who loved her sincerely, and live an ordinary but happy life. With that, the story cuts to another place, where a bunch of carriages were seen entering a massive castle. Inside one of those carriages was a girl by the name of Rin, who was suddenly startled when someone asked her to wake up. Turns out it was none other than our main protagonist, who had lost her life in the fire while saving her husband. In this life, she is Irene de Cloche, daughter of a baron. Upon turning towards the one waking her, she saw a lady by the name of Helen de Cloche, her mother in this new life, who was informing her that they had finally arrived at their destination. But the girl was completely tired from the long journey she had just endured, and that was when she heard another voice calling for her. Turning towards the person, she saw her father, a baron by the name of Arthur de Cloche, who was finally relieved that they managed to reach the place after a 3-day journey. Not just that, but another man was sitting across from her, complimenting her for her beauty, since even though she had just woken up, she was still looking as beautiful as ever. This handsome young man was David de Cloche, her younger brother, and upon hearing what the man had to say next, the poor girl was left speechless as she heard him asking if it was because she was finally going to become a proper lady today. That was the last thing she wanted to hear from the mouth of her own brother, so she reminded him not to say stuff like that. But the man could care less about how she felt, and even her father joined in to tease her. Seeing how both of them were acting, the poor girl fell silent, since this was pretty much a daily occurrence for her at this point, and she decided to just ignore both of them. Still, she couldn't help but feel grateful, since her final prayer had been answered. God had given her a new life as the daughter of a warm and loving family. But even with this blessing, one thought troubled her deeply, since this world she now lived in wasn't ordinary. It was the setting of a novel she used to read in her previous life. From what Irene remembered of the story, the true main lead was a girl from Earth, a dimension traveler who introduced her homeland civilization to this world, rose to the status of a saintess, and captured the hearts of the male leads. And today marked the beginning of that tale, since all the young nobles of the empire were gathering for their coming-of-age ceremony, a grand banquet meant to celebrate the saintess's arrival in the Stern Empire. In other words, it was the day every major character from the novel would come together for the first time. But Irene didn't care about any of that. Her mind was fixed on one person, and she wondered if he would still resemble the man she remembered. After all, the only reason she had ever read that novel in her past life was because one of the supporting male leads shared the same name and even the same appearance as her late husband. But of course, she tried to dismiss the thought. Just because someone looked like him didn't mean he was the same man. Even so, she couldn't stop her heart from stirring with a quiet excitement, since soon she would finally see that face again. With that, the story cuts to the inside of the grand hall, where everyone had finally gathered and were waiting with anticipation for the star of the banquet to arrive. In the same crowd was the whole Cloche family, who seemed surprised at the number of people attending this year's banquet. Seeing the sight, Helen informed everyone that pretty much every noble house of the empire had gathered in this place, to which Arthur reminded her this was a special occasion after all, since everyone wanted to see the saintess with their own eyes. Meanwhile, our girl was feeling quite nervous with the whole setup, and noticing this, David leaned closer and reassured her that there was nothing to worry about because her family was right there with her. Before she could respond, everyone heard a loud voice ring out across the hall, announcing the arrival of the Stern Empire's Crown Prince, Jace Stern Helio, along with Duke Leopard. Hearing the announcement, all eyes turned towards the man as he slowly made his way to greet his guests. Watching him finally show up, the whole room bowed in front of the man to show their respect to their Crown Prince. So did our beautiful Irene, but she was still curious about the man standing behind the Crown Prince, the Duke Leopard. As soon as her eyes landed on him, she felt her heart skip a beat. It was a face she knew all too well, one she thought she would never see again. With that, the story cuts back a couple of years, where we are told that the reason Irene, a mere B-class guide in her previous life, was able to become the exclusive guide for an S-class Esper was because of their overwhelming matching rate, which was unusually high. Normally, Espers and guides are ranked from S down to D class, and the theory was that those in the same class should have a higher matching rate, but the two of them were an unusual case that broke that rule completely. At that time, Irene was over the moon. She had just become the exclusive guide to her crush, so much so that she tried her best to ignore the reluctance he always showed toward her. With time, things moved forward, but their relationship always remained one-sided. Even in their deepest moments of guiding, he was always on guard, his mind drifting elsewhere. Looking back on those memories, Irene knew she had realized from the start that he didn't marry her because he truly wanted to. But even knowing that fact, she was still happy with him. And when her superior told her that Seal wanted to marry her, she had been so overjoyed she didn't stop to consider anything else. With that, the story shifts back to the present, where Irene, while recalling those memories, could feel her heart throbbing after seeing him again after so many years. The man standing before her looked just as handsome as he did back then. But as those thoughts filled her mind, she heard the announcement that the daughter of Asteras, the saintess, was finally arriving. The moment Irene's eyes landed on the saintess, she froze in disbelief. The face she saw was one she knew all too well from her previous life. While everyone else was mesmerized by the saintess' beauty, Irene was terrified. With that, her memories rushed back to the time when a woman had approached her, warning her not to get close to Seal. According to her, Irene was just a B-class guide and could never handle the power of someone like him. And the face of that woman, it was the same one standing before her now. Suyin, a C-class guide who had always despised Irene's presence around Seal and made her life miserable. And now that very same Suyin was here as the female lead and saintess from another dimension. Seeing her getting so close to Duke Leopard made Irene's heart feel strange, heavy in a way she couldn't explain. That was when she heard David's voice asking if she was all right, since she seemed to be acting a little off. Thankfully, he didn't press any further, and instead pointed out how beautiful and mystical the saintess was. Hearing his words, Irene quietly agreed that he was right about that. But of course, what's a brother if he doesn't tease his sister? That was when Irene saw him wink at her before saying that, to him, she was still the prettiest girl in the entire banquet. Hearing that, Irene's whole world shattered. She almost puked right there and then. Embarrassed beyond words, she started punching him and telling him never to say stuff like that when they were outside. But at least he managed to pull her out of that heavy thought. And with that, Irene reminded herself that the man standing there only looked like her husband and wasn't the same person. With that, she saw the three of them making small talk. The prince, clearly interested in the saintess, praised her for her beauty and commented that it must be divine will for her to celebrate her coming-of-age ceremony with the imperial family of Stern. But it turned out the man didn't even know her name yet, and he was already hitting on her. So the girl introduced herself as Li Suoyan. With that, the whole place erupted with cheers as everyone praised the woman for her beauty. But during all of it, Duke Leopard's eyes caught something in the crowd. He spotted a particular figure standing quietly in the back, and of course, who else could it be? It was our beautiful Irene. And unbeknownst to her, the man for some reason seemed quite interested in her. With that, the story cuts to the night where everyone had gathered outside to admire the beautiful sky. That was when a female from the crowd suddenly pointed at a particular star above, calling it the Irene. Turning their eyes to the heavens, everyone saw a single star shining brighter than the rest. Seeing this, Helen turned to Irene and suggested they all take this chance to pray, to which the girl agreed, since the highlight of the coming-of-age ceremony was to pray under the star Irene when it shines at its brightest. Just like that, our girl clasped her hands and started praying. In her 10 years in this world, she still couldn't understand why she was transmigrated into the world of a novel. But there was one thing she knew. This was the first warm, loving family she had ever known, so she prayed to stay with them happily for as long as she could. But while she was praying, she didn't notice the stares of the crowd. Everyone was looking at her in awe because for some reason her whole body was sparkling like the stars in the sky. And when she finally finished, she felt a gentle hand rest on her. It was her mother blessing her after witnessing the sight. The girl still had no idea what had happened, but before she knew it, her whole family surrounded her, blessing her just like her mother had. Seeing how much everyone cared about her, Irene's eyes started welling up. Not because she was sad, but because she was actually happy. For the first time, she felt what it was like to be cared for, and it made her smile through the small tears. Just like that, the event wrapped up and everyone started getting ready to leave. So did Irene and her family, who were waiting for their carriage to arrive. But our girl was not happy at all, about how they were being treated. First, they had to enter the castle in order of status, and now they couldn't even leave when they wanted, since the more influential families had to go first. On top of that, she suddenly felt a strange warmth creeping over her and wondered if it was just the weather. While she was still lost in thought, she heard her father's voice. He reminded her that since she was officially an adult now, he wanted to buy her something as a present to celebrate. And with all the confidence of a doting father, he told her to ask for anything she wanted and he'd make it happen. Hearing his words, the loud mouth standing beside her just couldn't keep quiet and blurted out that she should ask for a bow. reminding her how she once said she always wanted one. And just like she feared, her mother heard his words, and boy, oh boy, she was not happy. Before Irene even realized what was happening, both her father and brother were frozen stiff as the woman's glare locked on her, and the girl knew she was in a whole world of trouble. With that, the story then cut 10 years back to the day the real Irene of this world lost her life after suffering severe burns from a fire. Just as everyone was about to say their farewells to the child, a miracle happened, and everyone saw the supposedly dead girl rise from her coffin. Seeing the sight, the whole family rejoiced, thinking it was divine intervention. But ever since that day, her mother developed a severe safety obsession. She worried about her constantly and even forbade Irene from wandering outside the manor alone or touching anything remotely dangerous. And right now, that very same woman was scolding her, telling her not to even think about getting a bow. Our poor Irene, who had just turned into an adult for the second time, stood frozen in terror as her mother tore into her for even considering something so reckless. But this time, Irene finally snapped. She reminded them all that she was an adult now, and was sick of standing on the sidelines while her father and brother fought off monsters whenever they invaded their territory. She told her mother that she was also part of this family and she wanted to fight alongside them to protect their home. Her mother, however, didn't care about the reasoning and flat out told her no. But then Irene caught the tears welling up in her eyes as she admitted she only said that because she couldn't bear the thought of losing her again. That shut Irene right up, and she stood there quietly, watching as her mother finally broke down crying in front of her. But just then they heard the announcement that their family's carriage had finally arrived. So to ease the situation, David wasted no time and told everyone it was time to head out. But then something completely unexpected happened. Out of nowhere, Irene slumped against his shoulder. Shocked, he quickly caught her before she could hit the ground. The moment their eyes landed on her face, a chill ran through the group. Her skin was flushed, her body burning with heat, and it was clear she wasn't well at all. With that, the scene cuts to another place where a female was seen lying on a bed and was having trouble breathing. It turned out it was Irene, but not the one we know of. It was the original Irene from her real world, who was surprised to find herself back in the apartment she shared with her husband. But before she could process the situation, she heard the door to the room creaking open. Upon turning towards the door, she saw the man himself walking into the room carrying ice and a wet cloth in his hands. Without saying much, he placed the things next to her and sat beside her on the bed, saying it was still too early and suggested she get some more sleep. Wait a second, do I see hickeys on her neck? And here I thought the guy didn't care about her. Okay, back to the story. Watching his face, Irene wondered if somehow she managed to return back to her original world. And that was when she noticed him staring at her neck for some reason. But before she could ask the reason, she heard him telling her to wear a turtleneck tomorrow. But the girl had no clue what he was talking about, and before she could ask, she saw him picking up a piece of ice from the glass, telling her to eat up since it would help bring down her fever. The girl did as told, and as soon as the ice touched her lips, the coolness spread through her mouth, easing her burning temperature. To the man's surprise, she quietly asked him to feed her more. Hearing those words, he couldn't help but let out a soft chuckle at how she wanted to be pampered and chose to give in to her request. He prepared to feed her another ice cube, but this time he decided to do it in a way more fitting of the moment. So he slipped the ice into his mouth, then leaned in toward her. Before she could process what was happening, his lips were already on hers. For a moment, she froze, stunned at the sudden affection. This was nothing like how her seal usually treated her. It almost felt like a dream. But as the chill of the ice mixed with the warmth of his kiss, she realized deep down that this was what she had always wanted from him. With that, the scene cut once more, and this time Irene was seen regaining consciousness in the world of the novel, only to realize that everything she had just experienced was nothing more than a dream. As her eyes fluttered open, her mother broke into tears of relief and explained what had happened. Irene had been unconscious for 3 whole days. Back at the castle, when she suddenly collapsed with a fever, no one knew what to do. That was when Duke Leopard, who happened to witness the situation, stepped in. After hearing what was going on, he not only called in a doctor for her, but also arranged a portal so she could be taken home and cared for immediately. With that, the story cut a couple of minutes later, and Irene was seen pacing around her room lost in thought, since she hadn't expected the seal of this world to help her, especially since they had never even met before. But that wasn't the most pressing matter right now, since she knew exactly what this fever meant. It was an awakening fever, the same symptom all espers and guides went through before their powers surfaced. And because she had experienced this once in her past life, she recognized it instantly. She knew it was a guide awakening fever. That was what troubled her. From what she remembered of the novel, there were no guides in the entire Stern Empire. The only espers in the kingdom were the Crown Prince and Seal. Both had their first guiding only after the saintess Suyun arrived from another world, which was why the two ended up clashing over her, and that was how the story was supposed to progress. She wondered what could have caused this change. With that, the scene cut back to the Stern Imperial Palace, where Duke Leopard, better known as Seal, and that's what I'll call him for convenience, was buried in paperwork. It turned out he wasn't just working. He was digging into the history of the entire Closhy family. Ever since the banquet, when he first laid eyes on that woman, his curiosity about her hadn't let him go. It turned out that night when Irene had unknowingly called out the saintess's real name, Seal had heard it, and that was the problem. At the time, the saintess hadn't revealed her name to a single soul, Yet from Irene's expression, it was clear she somehow knew who she was. On top of that, the symptoms he had seen in her were unmistakable. They were signs of an awakening fever. Another gifted person emerging in the Stern Empire was one thing, but what unsettled him even more was her connection to Suyin. And that is when Seal began to wonder if Irene was like him, someone who had received a divine revelation and come to this world from Korea. Hold up, wait a second, back up a little. Are you telling me this man is the real deal? The real Seal from Irene's world? Okay boys, things just got a whole lot more interesting. With that, the story cut to that tragic day, the day he lost his wife in that world after losing control over himself. He had begged her to open her eyes, pleading with everything he had, but it was no use. She was truly gone. That truth hit him like a hammer. All the calm she had ever brought into his life, the peace she had carved out in the chaos of his heart, shattered instantly, and rage surged up from deep inside him, boiling over like lava breaking through the earth. In that darkness, a voice came to him. It told him not to seek the shadow of the star, but the star itself. This was the path he must take for the Empire. When Seal opened his eyes again, he found himself back in his homeland, the Stern Empire, at a point in time before he had even met Irene. So for my confused brothers out there, let me break it down. This man time-traveled twice. First, from this place in the novel's timeline to Irene's real world. Then, after he ended her with his own hands after treating her like trash for years, he was thrown back again to this moment in time. Back in the present, Seal was burning through his brain cells trying to make sense of everything. He had been returned to this world 2 weeks ago, and he was certain there was a reason for it. But none of that mattered to him. He was still obsessed with getting back to his wife and making up for everything he had done. With the saintess finally arriving in this world, he finally had the chance to go back to Korea like before and start over. And that was the only reason he sought out the saintess, someone he never wanted to get involved with again, to use her, cross dimensions, and find his wife. All of that was spinning through his head when, out of nowhere, he suddenly saw his wife walking toward him. He was left stunned. Finally seeing his one and only guide standing right in front of him, he started reaching for her. At that moment, he made up his mind. If he could meet her again, he didn't care if he never returned back to the Empire. But just then, he suddenly started coughing up blood and realized what this meant. It was a sign that it was time to receive his guidance once again, so he wasted no time and reached into his pocket. He brought out a small bottle containing some liquid. It was holy water, something he used to keep his powers under control before meeting with his wife, but he knew this wasn't enough anymore. At this rate, he was certain he might need to receive guidance from the saintess before he could return to Korea. Just then, he noticed a picture mixed in the middle of the papers about the Klosh family. Looking closer, he saw that it was Irene, and he wondered why she always reminded him of his wife, since they didn't share any resemblance except for the tiny freckle under her eye. As he was still lost in his thoughts, he heard someone call for him outside the room. As the man entered, he saw that it was one of his butlers, bringing a letter from someone named Lord Aiden. The man, knowing Seal wasn't interested in it, asked if he should just put it in the chest like always. Seal said yes, but then, for some reason, he changed his mind and told the man to hand it to him instead. It turned out that Lord Aiden was his younger brother. From childhood, that boy had been a very sensitive kid, easily irritated by the smallest disturbances. As time passed, his bizarre behavior only increased, and he was diagnosed with a symptom of mental illness, which was why he had been confined to the Annex Manor. Before Seal returned to the past, he had kept his distance from him because he wasn't fond of the boy. But now, after encountering various espers with different abilities in Korea, he finally understood what his brother truly was. He wasn't mentally ill. He was an esper with mental abilities. With that realization, Seal decided he needed to go and see his brother immediately. The story fast-forwards outside the Leopard Annex Manor. Inside, footsteps of a man were heard making his way deeper inside the mansion. Eventually, he managed to reach a certain room, and wasting no time, he opened the door. Looking inside, he saw a scared young man sitting, who seemed startled to see someone entering his room unannounced. Turns out this scared-looking young man was actually Aiden Leopard, younger brother of Seal. And the one who came to visit him was none other than Seal himself. Seeing his brother after so many years, the kid was left stunned, unable to believe his eyes. But before he could get any closer, Seal stopped him by grabbing onto his shoulder. Before the kid could ask a reason for this sudden visit, he heard Seal telling him they were all wrong about him. He wasn't suffering from mental illness. In reality, he was an esper just like him. Hearing those words, the kid didn't know what to say, since as far as he knew there were only 2 espers in the whole kingdom. Meanwhile, seeing the poor child's face and what he had to go through all these years, Seal wasn't able to hold his emotions. He embraced him in his arms and with a calm voice told the kid he was here to take him away from this place back to their real home. With that, the story fast-forwards. Both brothers were seen making small talk. That is when Seal heard the kid asking if he was certain that he was an esper. Seal nodded. He reminded him of what he had said in the past, that he could see 2 sides of the people around him. Curious, Seal asked what he meant by that. That is when the kid finally revealed that he could somehow hear other people's voices inside his head. When he told them to be quiet because he didn't want to hear the voices, everyone just gave him a strange look, insisting they hadn't said anything. Yet behind their smiles on the surface, he could clearly hear everything they were really thinking. Hearing the kid's words, Seal was now almost certain that his brother was an esper with mental-type abilities, otherwise known as a psychic esper. Not only that, but his powers were so extraordinary that he could even read people's minds. As these thoughts ran through Seal's head, he heard the kid tell him that his big brother was nothing like those other people, since around him he couldn't hear any voices at all. To that, Seal only smiled at the kid, knowing the true reason was because his own class was far higher than his brother's, which was why he couldn't read his mind. But that wasn't important right now. He quickly got to the point and told the kid to listen carefully to what he was about to say. He explained that espers suffer pain as a side effect of using their powers, and that this pain only grows stronger over time. That's why he must learn to endure it, keep his emotions in check, and wait patiently until he finds his true guide who could one day alleviate his suffering. With a serious expression, Seal firmly instructed him never to rely on the powers of other guides, or even that of the saintess. But that last part left the kid confused, since from everything he had heard, the saintess was someone they were supposed to be grateful for. She was someone who had descended from another world to serve the stern empire, which itself had no guides. Hearing his words, Seal fell silent, unsure how to explain that part to him. Only he knew what the saintess was truly like. To the rest of the people, she was revered as the daughter of the star, Irene herself. And that was precisely why in the past he too had blindly placed his faith in her. With that, the story shifts back to the very first time Seal met the saintess, when she revealed that she had come from another world, from a country called Korea, a place where many guides existed. Back then, that was shocking news for everyone, since no one in the Stern Empire had ever even heard of such a place. The idea of another world, let alone one filled with many guides, was beyond anything they could comprehend. Without wasting any time, Jace asked the girl if that was the case. Then would it be possible for her to bring more guides from her world into their kingdom? To their surprise, the saintess confidently claimed she could, and believing her words, Seal chose to follow her through the dimensional gate. That was how he first arrived in the land known as Korea. What met his eyes there was unlike anything he had ever imagined. Towering buildings that seemed to pierce the skies themselves. But at that time, he had no idea that the saintess had no real interest in the well-being of the Stern Empire. Nor did he know that she alone possessed the ability to open gates between dimensions. By the time Seal realized that she had only brought him to Korea to use him, it was already too late. The Korean government's Esper and Guide Alliance had bound him. Once they learned that he was an S-class Esper capable of wielding both fire and wind, they had no intention of letting him return to his true world. Worse still, they even attempted to force him into a bond with the saintess Suyeon, but their matching rate was abysmally low, something Suyeon herself could never accept. Unfortunately for Seal, his matching rate with other guides was no better. Just when they were about to conclude that he was incompatible with the guides of Earth because he was from another dimension, Irene came into the matching room by chance. Back in the present, Seal was seen smiling, recalling that time, since back then he did truly hate her in the beginning. Meanwhile, his younger brother noticed him drifting off and asked if he was alright. Snapping from his thoughts, the man just patted the kid on the head, apologizing for getting lost in thought for a moment. But he knew he couldn't tell any of that to him at the moment, since saying negative things about the saintess might only make him grow suspicious of him, and he decided to keep all of that to himself for the time being. So with that, he decided to reveal the true reason he came to visit the kid, and told him he needed his help with something important. Surprised, the kid asked what it was, and that was when Seal told him he wanted him to accompany him to the Closhi domain, specifically to read Lady Irene Cloche's mind. With that, the story shifted to the Closhi manor where the whole family was gathered around the table, enjoying a meal. Meanwhile, our girl, while eating, couldn't help but reflect on how her days since awakening as a guide in this world had been strangely peaceful. Nothing like the life she once knew back in Korea. Not that she was complaining. After all, unlike Espers, guides didn't display any remarkable traits upon awakening. And without an Esper to guide, she was no different from any ordinary person. And yet, one thing had been troubling her deeply. She had noticed a strange change in her body after that day. The old burn scar that the real Irene bore before she awoke in this body had transformed into the shape of flower buds. This was something entirely new, something she had never heard of before. And as far as she knew, no guide had ever undergone a change like this. As she was lost in her thoughts, she was suddenly startled by her mother's voice asking if she planned to head to the training grounds with her father, to which the girl told her she was. Hearing her answer, her mother gave her a concerned look, but, with no other choice, told her to do as she pleased, reminding her to be careful and to enjoy her time there. The truth was, ever since Irene had kept her awakening as a guide a secret from her family, her mother had blamed herself for Irene's sudden fever and carried a heavy guilt. At first, Irene felt guilty too, seeing her mother take responsibility for something that wasn't her fault. But strangely, that guilt turned into a blessing. Her mother's overprotectiveness eased, and Irene was now allowed to openly step into the training grounds, something she had once only dreamed of. Which is why, unlike in her past life, when she trained only to survive, this time she was going to train for something far greater, to protect her beloved family. With that, the story cuts to the Closhi Guard training ground, where all three of them had gathered. Irene, for the first time in this world, was preparing to shoot a bow to show her father what she was capable of. But for some reason, the weather was too windy, and she wondered if she would be able to hit the target. Since this was just practice, she figured it shouldn't matter that much if she missed. So with that thought in mind, she pulled the bowstring, aiming right at a target in the distance, and just as she was ready, she let go. The arrow went flying straight at the thing and landed right in the middle of the small target. Seeing how she managed to pull that off on her first try, both her father and brother were left amazed. The next thing our girl knew, she was being showered with praises from both of them, even going as far as to say that she was so good at archery that she could give their guards a run for their money. Hearing their praises, the girl felt a little conflicted, since she knew the only reason she managed to hit that target was because the wind guided the arrow. But still, hearing praises from her family always felt nice to her, so she decided to go along with it and told both of them that if that was the case, then maybe she should compete with a guard too, to see if she was really that good. Meanwhile, as they were chatting, they failed to realize that they were being watched by someone from a distance. That someone was none other than her stalker ex-husband Seal, who came to spy on the poor girl. Turns out the day after asking Aiden for his help, both brothers immediately left for Cloche. Since this was an unofficial trip, both brothers decided to keep their identities a secret. But one thing which they didn't consider was that there were no portals in Cloche, which was why they took a portal to the nearest region and then took a carriage to travel all the way to this place. After arriving at the Cloche domain, Aiden was so tired that he immediately went to sleep. Meanwhile, Seal on the other hand slipped out for some light reconnaissance towards House Cloche. That is when he spotted the three of them in the training ground, and upon seeing that Irene was getting ready to launch an arrow, he couldn't help but intervene. Using his wind ability, he ended up guiding the thing straight towards the target. But it turns out he never intended to intervene in the first place. This was just instinct, similar to what he once did in the past in Korea when he helped Irene with her archery. What was troubling him the most was the fact that the way Irene used that bow just now was exactly identical to how his wife used to do it. Recalling that fact, he felt his heart throbbing as he realized how similar both women were. As he was still pondering those thoughts, wondering if all of that was just a mere coincidence, he saw Arthur de Cloche turning right at him. Turns out the man knew from the very start that he had been watching them in secret. Seeing this, Seal realized he just blew his cover. With no other choice, he landed behind the training ground. That is when he got approached by the big man himself, and from that look on his face, the man didn't look happy. To clear the air, Seal told the man, or should I say lied to the man, that he wasn't planning on spying on them like this. He just came to their domain to show his brother around the Empire's outskirts. But the man wasn't convinced and asked if he was talking about Lord Aiden. Upon hearing he was right, he got straight to the point and asked why he chose to visit this place out of the many regions available. Seal's excuse was that they were indeed visiting other regions, but the reason they came to this place in particular was because they heard this domain didn't have a portal, so they decided to check it out. But no way in hell was the man buying that story, and he asked if that was the only reason. Seeing his expression, Seal felt a little scared but managed to keep a calm expression and wondered how to handle this situation, since he had already given a reasonable explanation, but the man still seemed hostile towards him. Just as he was thinking that, he heard the man asking if he came here with his brother to just visit their domain, then why the hell was he sneaking around spying on his daughter? That startled Seal, and he had no answer to that question. Noticing the man's expressions growing darker, he started sweating in fear, since there was no way he could tell him bluntly that he came to investigate his daughter because he was suspicious of her. With no other choice, he told him it was just a mere coincidence. He was just passing by and happened to notice her handling a bow, and since it was a rare sight to see a lady using such a thing, his gaze naturally followed her. With that, he fell silent, waiting for the man's response. But instead, he saw him walking towards him saying she is his daughter. Before Seal was even able to flinch, the man was already in his face with a look beaming with pride, bragging about how truly extraordinary his daughter was. Seeing his mood doing a full 180 in an instant, Seal didn't know how to respond, so he just decided to play along and told the man he was truly correct about that, and that was exactly why he wasn't able to look away. Hearing that, the man actually felt proud, since the Duke himself was praising his precious daughter. Meanwhile, Seal himself was regretting ever praising the girl, since the man just started rambling about her while Seal just stood there in silence, listening to his words. After he was done bragging about the girl, he asked Seal where he was staying. Seal informed the man that since they just arrived, they had secured a room in an inn for now. Hearing that, Arthur pointed out that the domain didn't have luxury inns suitable for nobility and suggested he and his brother stay at their manor while they were here. The offer caught Seal off guard, since this arrangement would allow him to keep an eye on Irene without any obstacles. But before he could answer the man, he heard him reminding him how back in the castle he was the one who called a doctor for his daughter and even allowed them to use a portal. Thanks to that, she was able to recover quickly, and grateful for all that, he asked the man to kindly consider his offer, so he might have a chance to repay his generosity. Hearing such sincere words, Seal responded that if that was the case, he would gladly accept. With that, the story cuts back to the training ground, where both siblings suddenly heard a panicked voice calling out to them. Turning around, they saw a clumsy-looking woman by the name of Mary, who was Irene's personal maid, rushing toward them in a fluster. Seeing her in such a state, Irene wondered what was going on and quickly asked what was wrong. Struggling to catch her breath, Mary finally managed to tell them that Duke Leopard had arrived at their manor. The news left both siblings stunned, since such a noble man visiting them unannounced was shocking enough. But what startled them even more was the follow-up. His younger brother, Lord Aiden, would also be arriving soon. That meant it was all hands on deck back at the manor. Hearing that Seal was at her house, Irene wondered what was going on, since according to the original story, Seal never visited this domain. More importantly, he was visiting her house just when she awakened as a guide, and that fact was worrying her. So she figured to be careful around that man, since under no circumstances could she let him find out that she was a guide. As she was lost in her thoughts, she heard Mary's panicking voice telling her to hurry up, since they were short on time. With no other choice, the girl decided to do as she said and started running towards the manor to get dressed. Meanwhile, the poor little doggy in the back just stood there, since no one asked him to get dressed. While everyone was worried about Irene, just then his face lit up as he heard Mary's voice telling him to follow them, since he also needed to get changed. Just like that, both girls managed to reach the manor, but Irene was still worried about the fact that guides have a tendency to unknowingly emit aura guiding when they see an esper, due to an instinctual attraction towards each other. In the past, she had excellent control over her guiding, but now, freshly awakened as a guide, she was afraid she might unintentionally release aura guiding upon encountering an esper. With that, she finally opened the door to enter the place, and that is when her eyes finally landed on the man standing in front of her. Seeing his face once again, the girl froze, and both of them locked eyes for a moment, not saying anything at all. But just then, she noticed her mother standing behind Seal, and the woman was stunned seeing her showing up in front of the Duke in such clothing. Wasting no time, she rushed towards the girl, whispering for her to quickly go up with Mary to change, and then come down to the dining room. After she was done explaining that to her, she turned towards Seal, telling him to follow her to the dining room. Just like that, the man started walking away with both females behind him bowing. But Irene, however, couldn't resist stealing another glance at his face, and that was when she realized her powers were slipping out of control, forcing her to struggle to keep her focus. After some time, Seal, along with his brother, was seen making small talk at the dinner table while waiting for Irene to finally arrive. Since Arthur himself was a swordsman, Seal couldn't help but get curious about the guards under his command. Seeing how much interest he was showing, Arthur offered to take him on a tour around the place, to which Seal happily agreed. Just as they were making small talk, they heard knocking on the door and turned to see who it was. That is when their eyes landed on Irene, who was now in a beautiful dress, looking gorgeous. Seeing her finally show up, everyone was happy, especially at how beautiful she looked in that dress. Even the fanboy with Seal was mesmerized by her beauty and started blushing. That is when both brothers saw the girl greeting them, apologizing to Seal that she couldn't greet him properly earlier. But to her surprise, she saw the fanboy walking up to her to greet her properly, reaching out his hand while introducing himself as Aiden de Leopard. Seeing this sudden gesture, the girl was somewhat surprised, since from what she knew, handshaking was typically reserved for men. But thinking not much of it, she decided to go along with it and reached her hand out. That is when the horny little bastard gave her a kiss on the back of her hand, and that is when she realized what he was trying to do. It was customary in this place for men to kiss the back of a woman's hand as a sign of politeness, and since she had never met other noblemen aside from her father and brother, she had completely forgotten about it. Just as she was thinking all that, she noticed another hand reaching towards her, and turning towards the person, she saw that it was Seal calmly asking if he might have his turn as well. Without waiting for her answer, the man landed a smooch behind her hand, and this time Irene was completely speechless, her heart skipping before she quickly composed herself, pulling her hand back. She then heard the man pulling a seat for her to sit, and Irene, completely overwhelmed by the two brothers, simply thanked the man and sat down. After the greetings were over, Arthur told everyone that they should proceed with the dinner. With that, all of them started eating, but Irene, on the other hand, could still feel her heart throbbing in her chest while being around two espers. On top of that, her body was heating up for some reason, and she wondered what was going on. Meanwhile, the mind reader fanboy in front of her noticed her acting all strange, and I do not like the look on this kid's face. Just like that, the dinner was finished, but all of them kept chatting about stuff while Irene and her mother silently listened to their conversation. Finally, when it was all over, she came back to her room, completely exhausted from everything. On top of that, the strain of keeping her powers under control around those two espers had a massive toll on her body and mind. Not just that, but for some reason when she was around Seal, even though she knew he wasn't the same man from her past, she couldn't help but feel nervous around him and wondered what could be the reason. And if it was because the man kept staring at her the whole time, recalling his face, the girl collapsed onto her bed, completely overwhelmed by the storm of emotions surging within her. Frustrated by everything, she began cursing under her breath at her luck that the man had chosen to visit her at the very moment she awakened her powers. Yet, for the sake of her family, she knew she had to endure it a little longer. After all, there was no way they could afford the cost of constructing a portal on their own. They needed the Empire's support, for only then could their town truly flourish. It turned out that even though the Closhi family was considered part of the nobility, with a long tradition in the Stern Empire, they had never accumulated much wealth through business. The reason was simple. Their domain was often plagued by relentless monster attacks, making it one of the least safe regions in the Empire. Because of this, more than 80% of their income was constantly poured into training and maintaining guards to protect the territory. Yet despite their efforts, large contracts and investments always slipped away, as investors feared placing money into a land so vulnerable and unstable. As she was rolling on her bed wondering what she should do since they were in desperate need of money, a thought suddenly hit her. It turned out in the novel, after transmigrating to this world, the saintess introduced food from her homeland of Korea, and quickly those dishes and ingredients became hugely popular in the Stern Empire. Since the saintess hadn't been here for too long, this meant she hadn't introduced those dishes yet, which is why her plan was simple: secure the distribution rights for those ingredients before anyone else. Then, once their demand and prices skyrocketed, the Closhi family would finally gain the profits they so desperately needed. Meanwhile, in another part of the manor, Seal was being shown to his room by a butler, who politely informed him to simply ring the bell if he needed anything. Once the butler left and Seal was alone, he leaned back against the chair, letting the events of the day replay in his mind. What bothered him most was their first meeting, since Irene didn't release her guiding aura when she first saw him. Normally, that was a mistake a newly awakened guide might make, but the more he thought about it, the more frustrated he got, since this only meant one thing: instead of a guide, she awakened as an Esper. And for some reason, that fact irritated him far more than it should have. Unknowingly, he lost control over his powers, but luckily, he snapped back and took control over his emotions. Still, he was a bit disappointed, since he had hoped she would awaken as a guide, because in her he saw faint reflections of his wife. That thought gnawed at him. Instead of searching for a way back to the woman he truly longed for, here he was, secretly wishing that a stranger would show him the same guidance. And this was deeply frustrating him. With that, the story cuts to the next day where everyone had gathered at the training grounds, and Arthur was informing his men of the reason for this sudden assembly. Turning towards the guest of honor, he introduced the man standing in front of them all as Duke Leopard and his younger brother, Lord Leopard. Hearing those names, the whole crowd was left stunned, hearing that the man standing in front of them was the renowned Duke of the Empire. Not just that, but the man was devastatingly handsome. Meanwhile, Irene, listening to their whispers, couldn't help but think how everyone who first sees Seal acts in such a way, and she couldn't blame them either. She herself fell in love with him at first sight. As all that was going on, she heard her father asking Seal to say a few words to his men. Hearing that, the man stepped forward and started giving his speech, informing the men in front of him that despite lacking in numbers to be formally recognized as a knightage, their skills were well known among other order. Right now, when he was looking at them face to face, he could tell every single one of them was a formidable soldier. And for the crowd, yeah, they were actually blushing, watching the man praise all of them as manly, strong soldiers. Just as he was done speaking, a soldier from the crowd couldn't help but make a request of him. And when given the permission, the man told Seal that even though they live on the outskirts of the Empire, he had heard of not only his exceptional Esper abilities, but also his swordsmanship, and bluntly said that he would like to spar with him. This sudden request from the man shocked Arthur, but before he could say anything, the rest of the soldiers started making the same request, and that really irritated the man, seeing how all of them were acting in front of their guest. He apologized to Seal for their rudeness, but Seal didn't mind. If anything, he was actually excited. He had always been curious about the skills of the Closhi guards had heard so much about, so without hesitation, he gave the man permission, eager to see their skill firsthand. Meanwhile, our little fanboy was silently watching everything from a distance, and seeing all these burly men getting excited about sword fighting, the kid felt more than a little awkward. But lucky for him, Irene noticed that he was feeling uneasy, so to comfort him, she approached the kid and with a warm smile on her face told him they should watch the show together. The little brat actually started blushing, hearing those words come out of his sister-in-law's mouth, and like a good little puppy, he stepped closer to her, mumbling a shy, "Okay." And for Irene, she couldn't help but let out a small chuckle seeing how the kid was acting, since unlike his older brother, the kid really did seem rather cute. By then, the sparring match had started and the man, wasting no time, charged straight towards Seal. But without even breaking a sweat, Seal blocked the man's attack, and before the man could recover, he swung the blade, sending him tumbling back. Seeing the skill and power behind that attack, the soldier was left shaken, unable to believe what he had just witnessed. Even the rest of the soldiers were amazed, seeing how Seal managed to block and parry that attack with just his one hand. Not just the soldier, the rest of them were just as amazed, seeing how incredibly skilled Seal was with his sword. And of course, Puppy Number 2's eyes started sparkling with admiration for the man, and he couldn't help but step up to challenge him. For Seal, he didn't mind. In fact, he was actually pleased, and told him to come at him whenever he was ready. But just as they were about to start, both of them were startled by a loud noise coming from a distance. Before Seal could understand what was going on, he saw all the soldiers rushing to grab their weapons. Seeing this, he turned toward David and asked what was happening, and the man explained that the sound they had just heard was the horn signaling that monsters had appeared in their territory. Hearing that, Seal grew concerned, especially since Irene was also present in the area. That is when he heard her father instructing her and his brother to head straight back to the manor, and told them he would send a guard to accompany them both. But for Seal, that was far too risky, and before either of them knew what was happening, they suddenly found themselves floating in the air. That was when they saw Seal walking toward them, calmly telling them that he would use his wind ability to escort them back to the manor, since it was both faster and safer. Hearing this, for some reason, both of their faces went pale. And just as they were about to say something, a powerful gust of wind blew straight toward them, and in the next moment, everyone watched as the two of them were sent flying toward the manor at astonishing speed. After taking care of both of them, Seal turned towards Arthur, telling him he would be assisting them in the extermination of the monsters, and without waiting for an answer, the man started flying straight towards the location. The scene cuts to the battlefield where a bunch of orcs had gathered and were trying to enter the territory, and in front of them were a small number of guards who, with no other choice, decided to hold these things off while Arthur along with Thea. Reinforcements arrived, but just as both sides were about to clash, they heard a loud shout from the back telling everyone to fall back. Turning towards the man, they saw Seal hovering in the air, and before they could process the situation, Seal activated his fire ability and unleashed a powerful wave of fire straight towards the approaching orcs. The attack was so powerful that it engulfed the whole horde in an instant, and the whole place filled up with the cries of the creatures. And just as quickly it was all over, and all the men saw in disbelief how the whole horde fell in front of them with just that one attack. Just like that, the whole place got filled with the cheers of all the soldiers for our boy. With that, the story cuts a couple minutes later, and Arthur, along with the reinforcements, had finally arrived, and were surprised to see that Seal had single-handedly managed to take out all the orcs before they could even get there. Turning towards the man, he noticed that for some reason Seal was still in the air, and couldn't help but think how remarkable that man truly was. Meanwhile, Seal himself wasn't feeling so good. The aftermath of using his abilities was starting to kick in, and this time the side effects were far more severe than ever before. That was when he heard Arthur's voice, calling out for him to come down since there were no more monsters approaching. But to Arthur's surprise, the man completely ignored him. Instead, Seal turned around, and before Arthur could even say a word, he watched as Seal flew off into the distance and vanished into thin air. After some time, he was seen falling from the sky after exhausting all his energy and crashed straight into a mountain. The scene zooms in and Seal was seen writhing in agony on the ground. Because of the pain, his vision began to blur and he could feel himself slipping into unconsciousness. With no guides around to aid him, he knew he wasn't going to survive this. Meanwhile, back in the mansion, both Irene and Aiden had landed safely thanks to Seal. And just as Irene's feet landed on the ground, she unknowingly slipped and released some of her guidance, and the fanboy Esper standing beside her instantly felt her power getting absorbed into his body. But just then, Irene got a hold of herself and controlled her emotions. Wasting no time, she turned towards Aiden asking if he was alright, and the boy, yeah, he was feeling a lot more than alright at the time. And the poor girl beside him, unaware of the fact that he was an Esper who had just received guidance from her, wondered why he was making that face. But before she could ask the reason, she suddenly heard Mary's panicking voice calling for her. Turning towards the girl, she saw her running out of the mansion, telling Irene that her mother was so worried about her after hearing the news of monsters appearing in their domain. But the girl was more concerned about the little fanboy and told Mary to take the kid inside while she went to visit the mountain behind their manor. With that, she turned around and prepared to leave, but just then a hand appeared stopping her. Turning towards the one responsible, she saw the sparkling fool standing there, giving her that innocent look, and she couldn't help but wonder what had gotten into him all of a sudden. She heard the kid asking for the reason for visiting the mountains at a time like this. Meanwhile, Mary in the back was melting, seeing how cute the kid looked worrying about their mistress, and heard Irene telling him it was because she needed to check how the battle with the monsters was going. But the kid refused to let her go alone since it was dangerous. Irene assured him not to worry since she would be watching from a safe distance, and told the kid to please let go of her hand. But by now, she was really starting to worry why he was acting like this all of a sudden, almost as if he didn't want to leave her side. Just like that, the story cuts to a couple more minutes later, and Irene was seen riding her way towards the mountain on horseback. Upon arriving at the spot, she was left stunned, seeing green smoke rising from the location where the monsters were reported to be seen, since it only meant one thing. The creatures had already been dealt with, and she realized that the things were orcs because of the color of the smoke, which were not easy to deal with, and the fact that the battle ended with such powerful monsters so quickly meant Seal must have helped them fight off the creatures. She thought it was a blessing that the creatures attacked their land when he was around, otherwise there were sure to be many casualties. But just as she was about to return back to her mansion, she spotted something in the distance, and upon looking closer, she was left in disbelief, unable to believe her eyes as she saw a man lying on the ground under a tree. To her horror, the man was none other than Seal himself. Wasting no time, she approached the place, and upon calling him, she noticed that he was completely unresponsive and realized he was unconscious. She wondered why he would collapse in a place like this. But just as she was trying to make sense of the situation, she suddenly saw a massive wave of fire shoot past her face and got startled. Staggering back, she wondered what was going on since the man was clearly unconscious, so how could he be using his powers? That's when it finally hit her. The fact that he was using his powers while in an unconscious state meant he was experiencing a seizure, a side effect of using his powers, and she realized he needed guidance immediately. But getting close to him was difficult, and at this rate he was going to burn the whole forest down. So with no other choice left, she resolved to use her own powers to stabilize his condition. Thinking that, she activated her ability and began releasing her guidance for him to absorb. But after trying for a while, she noticed it wasn't working, which meant his seizure was far too severe to be calmed with aura guiding alone. That left her with no other choice but to switch to contact guiding. With that resolve, she removed her glove and took his hand in hers, allowing his body to directly absorb her guidance. Thankfully, this time it worked. She saw the raging flames around him gradually die down and his condition steadily improve. And after a short while, she saw everything finally return to normal. With this, she decided to return back home before he regained consciousness, but just as she was about to let go of his hand, he suddenly grabbed onto her wrist, and before she could process what was going on, the man pulled her straight towards her. She was wrapped tightly in his arms. Startled by this sudden act, the girl was left confused, wondering if he had already regained consciousness, and that is when she heard his voice saying that wasn't enough. Hearing those words, she turned to look at him, and just like that, the man had his lips pressed against hers. The unexpected kiss left her completely stunned. For a moment, her mind went blank and she lost control of her emotions, but quickly regaining herself, she managed to push away and demand what he was trying to do. Yet before she could take another breath, she found herself pinned to the ground, trapped completely beneath him. And that is when she saw him slowly getting closer to her face. Seeing that the guy had completely lost control, she started struggling, trying to break free, but it was no use. He was too strong, so with no other choice, she started screaming, telling him to let go. And then, right in the midst of her resistance, she heard him whisper something into her ear, and she heard some broken words coming out of his mouth. The man called her Isio, saying how much he missed her and promising he'd be better. Before the girl could make sense of what he meant, the guy's strength finally gave out, and he dropped straight on top of her. Seeing that he finally stopped, the girl let out a sigh of relief and quickly pulled herself out from underneath him. As she did, she recalled how Seal in the past also had a habit of murmuring incomprehensible things whenever receiving guidance during a seizure. Annoyed with everything, she thought to herself that he probably wasn't even aware of this habit from the start. But what really bothered her more was her broken lip because of him. She couldn't help but worry about what to do now, since her family was bound to notice and ask questions the moment they saw it. With that, the story skips ahead a few hours, where Seal was regaining consciousness after hearing someone's voice. Sitting up, he saw Arthur beside him, along with his guards who had been searching for him all this time. Seal, however, had no memory of what had happened. What he did notice was how fresh and healed he felt, almost as if he had just received guiding from someone. And upon asking what had happened to him, he heard Arthur explain that after searching for a while, they found him here unconscious. And with a cheerful expression, Arthur commented that Seal was probably just extremely tired after using such a remarkable ability on those orcs and had collapsed in this place. But Seal was more curious if someone else had found him before Arthur did, so he asked. To his surprise, Arthur told him he was the first one to discover him, since his servants often visited this area, and if any of them had seen him lying here, they would have taken him back to the manor immediately. The man had a point, but still, the fact that he felt so much better could only mean he'd received guidance from someone, and it couldn't have been the saintess, since she hadn't even begun exploring the domain yet. Not only that, but this clean and refreshing feeling was exactly like his wife Seohyun's guiding. As he was caught up in those thoughts, he heard Arthur suggest they head back to the manor since it was getting dark. With that, everyone began making their way back, but Seal still couldn't shake the question of who this person was, someone who had the same guiding as his wife. After some time, he arrived back at the place, and the first thing he did was go see his brother. Seeing him finally show up, Aiden was relieved, but more importantly, Seal noticed that the kid seemed eager to say something. Upon asking what was going on, he heard Aiden say he had found out something about Irene. Before Seal could even ask what he meant, Aiden continued, saying he believed Irene was an Esper. This sudden revelation shocked Seal completely, and he immediately asked how Aiden could be so sure about that. He reminded Seal that the real reason they came here was to read her mind, but ever since their first meeting, he hadn't been able to read her thoughts, just like with Seal himself. On top of that, when they arrived back at the manor earlier, she had used some kind of ability on him. Hearing the kid's explanation, Seal began to wonder what kind of Esper power she could have used and asked him directly what it was. The boy admitted he wasn't sure himself, but ever since she did it, he'd been feeling strange. His face was practically sparkling as he blushed, unable to put the sensation into words, and finally told Seal the only thing he knew for certain, that his mind felt unusually calm and at ease after it happened. As soon as he heard those words, Seal fell silent. From the way Aiden was describing it, it didn't sound like an Esper ability at all. It sounded more like guidance from a guide. And he began to wonder if he'd been wrong to think Irene had awakened as an Esper. While he was still lost in thought, he suddenly heard Aiden's voice again, saying there was something else he wanted to tell him. That is when Seal's entire world seemed to shatter, as he heard the kid say it felt even better when he held hands with her. In that instant, Seal's expression darkened, and Aiden froze as he heard his brother's enraged voice asking why he had held her hand. When he looked up, he saw fury written across Seal's face as he repeated the question harsher than before. Seeing that face, the kid was completely terrified and started stuttering back, but then Seal suddenly snapped out of it, realizing what he had just done. So to cover up, he turned around, apologizing and saying he was still tired, but deep down he wondered why he was feeling this way, why it upset him so much just because Aiden held Irene's hand. And since this obsessive thought of his wasn't letting go, he asked the kid once more the reason for holding her hand. The kid explained everything that had happened, how after they returned to the manor, Irene mentioned she was heading to the back mountain alone, and how in that moment he suddenly felt he didn't want to be apart from her, so he just grabbed her hand without thinking. That last part hit Seal like a thunderclap, and he asked Aiden which mountain he was talking about. And when he heard the answer, he froze. It was the very same place where he found himself after regaining consciousness. The realization struck him hard, as he realized that the one who gave him guidance was none other than Irene. But he wasn't completely certain about this, but still, he wondered if his prayers got answered and his precious Seo Hyun was brought to this world as Lady Irene. And if that were true, then everything, the doubts, the uncanny similarities, the way she carried herself, would finally make sense. After he was done processing all that, he thanked the kid for giving him all this information and told him to meet with him at dinner time in the dining hall. After all that, he stepped out of the room while recalling everything that the kid had told him, since he knew he still needed to investigate this further before coming to a conclusion. And for that, the obsessive nutcase figured what better time than when everyone was asleep to visit the girl. With that, the story cuts to Irene, who had just finished her meal, and the girl was not happy at the fool for biting her lip at the forest, since because of this wound she wasn't even able to have dinner with her family and ended up eating alone in her room, since she couldn't go in front of her parents with this face. But still, there was a thought troubling her, since from everything she witnessed so far, it only meant that Seal hadn't received his guidance from the saintess. Because when she found him, he was in dire condition, as if he hadn't received guiding for a long time. But that didn't make sense, since according to the original story, the saintess gives guiding to Seal and the crown prince right after crossing dimensions. And after piecing everything together, her suspicion only grew stronger that this time things are definitely unfolding different from the original story. With that, she started her daily light training before getting to bed while thinking over everything. And her mood only got worse while thinking about Seal, since all this was his fault in the first place. If he had followed the original story and hadn't come here, things would have been different, and that was really irritating her, since he hadn't changed one bit. Like always, he was making things difficult for her. But somehow she managed to calm herself, but it was still frustrating to remember how, back then, she had been blinded by love, and because of that she used to overlook all those annoying aspects of him. But now, things were different from back in Korea. She wasn't the same person anymore. Turns out back then, her ex-husband had been arrogant and fussy, and on top of that, obsessively controlling. He expected her to always be at home, and if he found out she had gone out without telling him, he would call endlessly until he got a hold of her. And once he discovered where she was, he would rush to that location and drag her back home. The strangest part was that after all that, he wouldn't even acknowledge her presence at home, he'd just go about his own business. Back then, she used to wonder why was it that he never had to tell her about meeting Soo-young or other espers, even though he needed to know about everyone she met. But despite all these thoughts and frustrations, she couldn't bring herself to leave him and often wondered what it was about him that had made her willing to sacrifice so much of herself for him at that time. Just like that, the story cuts a couple of hours and Irene was now seen peacefully sleeping in her room. That's when the window suddenly swung open and in came her obsessive ex-husband. The moment the sound of his foot landing on the floor reached her ears, Irene instantly woke up. But since she didn't know who had entered her room in the middle of the night, she decided to pretend to be asleep. After all, the only person who would do such a thing was her worried mother, who would come in to check up on her, but even she used to enter through the front door, not the window. Realizing this was an intruder, Irene reached under her pillow where she had a dagger hidden, which she always kept with her. Since at the beginning she struggled to trust her family, she stole it from her brother's room, and from then on she kept it with her as a lucky charm, but never thought she would ever need to use it. Just as she had feared, the man slowly started reaching for her, so without wasting a second, the girl swung the thing straight towards the man and managed to land a hit on his hand. But the thing was that it was too dark and she wasn't able to make out his face because of it, so with no other choice she lunged towards him once more, intending to end him before he could fight back. But to her shock, the man managed to grab onto her wrist and forced her back to the bed. Stunned, the girl struggled to break free, but just then she heard a familiar voice calling her Seo Hyun, and she froze after hearing that name after so many years. As she looked up, she saw him saying he knew it was her all along, and she completely froze as she heard the man asking if she really thought he wouldn't notice his own wife. Hearing all that, the girl was completely confused. Seeing Seal of all people entering her room like this in the middle of the night was shocking enough, but on top of that, he just called her Seo Hyun. As she was still processing all that, she heard the man asking why she kept her identity a secret from him, and without waiting for an answer, he started reaching for her injured lip. The moment he touched her wound, Irene flinched, and in that instant lost control over her power and accidentally released her guidance. As soon as that happened, Seal felt the aura entering his body, and at that moment, it became certain that the woman in front of him was none other than his wife that he had been trying to get to all this time. Meanwhile, Irene herself was left stunned seeing how she accidentally gave him a guiding, But before she could think of a way to break free, the man took her in his arms, telling her he looked everywhere for her. But Irene, still confused how he found out about her identity, pulled herself away from the man. On top of that, how did the seal in this world know who Sohyan was? With all these questions in her mind, she leaped away from him to get some time to process what was even going on. Since all this only meant one thing, that the man in front of her was truly her ex-husband, that thought terrified the girl, recalling how he used to treat her. But mustering up her courage, the girl told the man that he was mistaking her for someone else. Seeing that she was still denying it, Seal fell silent. But the next thing Irene saw was that same smirk on his face as the man told her she must be startled because he visited her in the middle of the night and apologized for dropping in like that. Yet the guiding she gave him made him miss her too much, and before the girl knew it, the guy was already walking towards her. Scared, Irene tried to move back but found herself trapped against the door. That's when the man placed his hand next to her, effectively blocking her escape. With rage in his eyes, the obsessive scum told her she wasn't going anywhere and ordered her to stay by his side. Watching everything, the girl didn't know what to think anymore. Since the seal she knew wasn't like this, because right now, even though he wasn't certain that she was his wife, he was looking at her with those eyes, and she wondered if he had ever truly loved her in their past life when she was Sohyan. The whole situation was weighing her down as she wondered how she was supposed to react to this. Should she admit that she was Sohyan and suggest they go on with their individual lives, or just deny it all the way? After thinking for a bit, she finally made up her mind and told the man that, like she had already said, she had no idea what he was talking about. After seeing how he hadn't changed after all this time and was still that obsessive person, she refused to submit in front of him anymore and told him she was not the person he knew of. On top of that, he was really starting to annoy her, since finally one of her dreams finally came to life and she found such a warm, loving family. And now he all of a sudden appeared out of nowhere, trying to ruin her life all over again. So the girl made it clear she wasn't the Sohyan who he claimed she was, but Irene de Closhi, the first and the only daughter of the beloved Closhi family, and demanded he leave her room immediately, or else she threatened she was going to call her father. She also warned him that if he ever dared to enter her room like this ever again, she would not hold back just because of the fact that he was a duke, and she would sue him. Hearing her words and seeing the expression on her face, the man actually started to back away from her and prepared to leave while apologizing for everything he had done. Just like that, he flew out of her room, leaving the girl behind in silence. Finally, with him gone, the poor thing fell to the ground, completely shaken from the whole thing. But deep down, she knew she couldn't deny that a part of her was actually pleased when she found out that the seal of this world actually remembered who she used to be. But that was it, just a part. Other than that, there was only anger in her heart for him. Even though she didn't know why he was suddenly obsessing over her, one thing was certain: she would never ever let him dominate her again. Meanwhile, outside the manor, Seal was seen landing in the distance. After coming down, he recalled Irene's words and her expression when she denied being Sohyan, and he wondered if he truly was mistaken, since the Sohyan he knew of would never have turned him down like that. On top of that, Sohyan being in this world didn't make sense either. Just as he was thinking all that, he suddenly felt a sharp, stinging sensation in his hand, and upon checking, he saw that wound inflicted on him by Irene, which was also proof that the woman was actually his wife, since the way she swung her weapon was just like Sohyan. On top of that, the guiding he received from her, there was no denying that was also just like Sohyan. Still convinced that the woman was his wife, he wondered why she was refusing him. And just like that, a few days passed, and Irene was growing frustrated by Seal's presence with each day. As she turned to look at the man, she found him staring right at her like a creep, and this was really frustrating her since he had started to blatantly stare at her all the time, making her very uncomfortable. Turns out, since that day in the room, the man had been following her around everywhere and lingering everywhere she went, and that was making her very uncomfortable. Seeing him do that all over again, she decided to just leave and told everyone to enjoy their meal since she wasn't feeling hungry, and without another word, she started walking out of the room. Meanwhile, Seal, growing equally frustrated by her constant ignoring him, just kept looking at her leave. Unbeknownst to him, her mother had noticed him staring at her daughter and realized something was up with both of them. Fast forward, Irene was seen making her way out of the manor, since she wanted to spend some time away from the house and that Seal for a while. She was planning on taking the horse out for a ride, but just as she stepped outside, she saw him appearing in front of her again. Yeah, it was the crazy stalker ex-husband, and the girl wasn't happy seeing his face in front of her. Just as she had thought, the man tried asking to accompany her for the ride, but she instantly cut him off mid-sentence, blatantly telling him no. But the man insisted, saying he was going on a ride himself and thought both of them could go out together. But the girl told him she wasn't going out at all, since the day just got so dark and gloomy, so she was just turning back to her room. But Seal pointed out that the sun was shining brightly, but she didn't care as long as she could avoid him as much as possible. Just as she turned to leave, the man called her Sohyan once more, telling her to stop. Realizing he was still obsessing over that, she turned towards him and heard him promising he wouldn't take too much of her time and asked if she would only give him a chance to explain everything. Seeing that helpless expression on his face, the girl froze, because in the past if Seal had asked her for something with that expression, she wouldn't have been able to turn him away. But right now, she wasn't feeling anything like that, and that surprised her. She wondered if it was because in this life she had a family that loves her for who she is, unlike the past life. And she realized that in this life, her family's love and affection had taught her that she was a special person, unlike how it was back in the other world, where she had lived by hiding herself and giving everything up for him, an existence no different from being dead. But this time, she refused to go down that same path and warned the man that if he continued to behave in this way, she would have no other choice but to tell her parents about what happened that night. After the warning, she simply turned around and started heading back into the house. Meanwhile, Seal just stood there watching her leave in silence, not knowing what to do anymore. Just then, he heard a voice from the back calling for him. Turning around, he saw that it was Arthur, and seeing him after so many days, the man asked where he was all this time and heard Arthur explaining that he was away from the manor because he had to stand watch at night at the borders. This surprised Seal since he was a baron, and he didn't know barons themselves served duties like that. So Arthur explained that over here all the guards served the same duties equally regardless of rank, since it was a great form of discipline and an effective way to share skills among each other. And on top of that, since monsters do not appear on a schedule, they can't always have rookies standing watch at the borders. And this way they also get a chance to teach the new guys everything from faint presence and shifts in the wind to the vibration in the ground. Hearing all that, Seal was actually quite impressed and even said he would also use this same strategy with his knightage when he returned. And Arthur felt honored seeing how his methods were being praised by the Duke himself. After their small chatter, Seal heard the man pointing out that it had already been a week since they arrived in their domain and asked if he was able to show Lord Aiden the nooks and crannies of their land. Hearing those words, Seal felt a bit awkward, since he knew this was just a way for him to politely tell them to leave. But Seal, on the other hand, had no intentions of leaving just yet, especially after finding out Irene was actually his wife. So he told the man that he hadn't been able to show Aiden everything, which was why he was planning on staying here a while longer, and seeing his expressions, asked if there was a problem with that. Turns out the man himself had no issues with him staying, but his wife, on the other hand, was another story. Hearing that, Seal understood what was going on, because ever since he first arrived in this place, he noticed that the real head of the house Cloche was Baroness Helen de Cloche, which meant he needed her approval if he wanted to live under their roof. With that realization, he asked Arthur if it would be alright to seek permission from the Baroness Cloche herself, and to that Arthur's face immediately lit up, telling him that it was an excellent idea. And as a devoted husband, he began ardently standing up for his wife, explaining the whole situation. He said they were honored to know that Seal wished to stay and explore their domain, but he believed his wife was a little concerned, as she had not been able to properly serve him due to his unexpected visit, and asked if he would kindly understand. Meanwhile, Seal, who had been listening in silence, started thinking. As only a baron, the man was in no position to make demands regardless of how long he wished to stay in this domain. But now, knowing his daughter was his beloved wife Seohien, things were different, since this technically made the man his father-in-law, and for that reason, he couldn't risk leaving a bad impression on him. With that thought in mind, he told the man that he had no idea how worried the Baroness was about him, since he had been having such a great time here with all of them, and assured the man that he would have a nice chat with her. And Arthur, seeing how polite and wise the man was, knowing how to respect those of lower stature than him, was actually touched. While all that was going on, in some other part, Irene was seen passing her time in the garden. Turns out she had to use the back door to get here, since she didn't want to stay in her room, and the only thought in her head was when will Seal leave, since it was getting very uncomfortable with him lurking around her all the time. Just as she was thinking all that, she suddenly heard a loud scream from the back, and upon turning around she saw someone standing in the distance. Upon looking closer, she saw that it was Aiden, and she wondered what he was doing in this place, and on top of that, why was he so frantic? But as she looked closer, she noticed a caterpillar crawling on his arm, because of which the kid was squirming like a little puppy. So without any hesitation, Irene rushed toward him, grabbed the tiny creature, and flung it away into the distance. Once she had dealt with the tiny creature, she turned to Aiden and asked if he was alright. And the kid looked more than alright, seeing her swoop in like his Prince Charming to save him from the caterpillar. That's when he heard the girl asking what brought him all the way out to the back garden, to which Aiden explained that he was just looking for a quiet place and ended up here. After listening to the reason, Irene couldn't help but tease Aiden for being afraid of bugs, to which the kid denied, saying he wasn't afraid of them. He just thought they were gross and asked if she didn't think the same. But Irene laughed and told him she didn't. In her opinion, nothing was grosser than monsters. Hearing that, the kid started sparkling, asking if she had ever seen monsters in real life before. To that question, the girl fell silent, since in her previous life she had seen countless monsters but never after transmigrating in this world, thanks to her mother being overly protective. So she told the kid that she only saw them in books and roughly knew what they looked like because her brother described them to her in detail. And to that, the sparkling fool felt a little jealous, since his brother never talked to him about monsters before. So Irene suggested he try asking him about them, since she herself used to pester her brother for that. Hearing that, the kid immediately asked if she really thought his brother would tell him if he asked. Seeing his expressions, Irene couldn't help but think how cute the kid was and told him of course he would, pointing out that he brought him all the way here to give him better exposure to the world. And she was sure he really cared about him if he was willing to go this far for him. But instead of cheering up, the kid actually got more depressed, since he knew the truth that the real reason his brother came to this place was her. So he just turned around telling Irene he was going back to his room. And this sudden act surprised the girl, but before she could ask him about it, she saw the kid sprinting back toward the house, leaving her wondering if she had said something wrong. After some time, she was seen walking inside the manor with a bunch of flowers she picked from the garden for her mother. And after walking for a bit, she spotted Mary doing chores and asked if she knew where her mother was and heard her saying she was in the living room, to which Irene thanked the girl and started making her way towards the place. And after getting to the place, she wasted no time and opened the door, calling for her mother. But the sight in front of her made her freeze in shock as she saw her mother sitting with Seal. And upon seeing her entering the room like that, both of them froze, as Irene wondered what was going on and why was Seal with her mother. Well, that's all, folks. Leave a like, and if you want to know what happens next, please hit the subscribe button. Until next time, take care.